Hey everyone, happy Friday. Welcome back to Last Week in Europe. Today we have to talk about how Europeans are preparing to pay for their defense industry, the raging battle in European courts over immigration, the plans for a Buy European Act, how Algeria is holding France hostage in a visa dispute, alongside some smaller stories in our weekly brief. European leaders discussed how to increase defense spending after the United States suspended military aid to Ukraine. NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte is calling for defense spending over 3% of national GDP, and President Trump wants countries to spend 5%. But where will Europe find the money? Last Monday, European Commission President von der Leyen proposed her Rearm Europe proposal on defense spending. The first measure is to exclude defense spending from European rules on national debt. This would allow governments to spend more without being punished by the EU for breaking the 3% deficit limit. If member states would increase their defense spending by 1.5% of GDP on average, this would equal 650 billion euros over the next 4 years. The second proposal is for the European Commission to borrow 150 billion euros. It would then distribute the money to member states as loans over the next 5 years. This money could then be used to jointly buy weapons that countries could also send to Ukraine. It's similar to how the EU lent money during the COVID pandemic for economic recovery. An added benefit is that these purchases would strengthen Europe's defense industry, which I covered in a previous video. A third proposal is using billions in existing EU funds that were intended for less wealthy regions for defense instead. And the final two proposals are about mobilizing private capital and allowing the European Investment Bank to spend more on defense. But there's a problem here. Lending and raising debt are short-term fixes. For the long term, the EU might have to make tough choices, including redirecting money from pension and social spending to defense. Less pensions, more guns. NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte already called on European governments to make sacrifices. This means spending less on welfare and health and more on defense. He pointed out that European countries spend up to a quarter of national income on pensions, health, and social security. In this graph, you can see that social spending in European countries increased significantly over the last 30 years relative to GDP. But for most of the same period, European governments reduced their defense spending. And a very big part of this social spending is made up of pensions. In 2021, pension spending was equal to 12.9% of the EU's GDP, while defense spending was at just 1.3%. So Mr. Rutte might have a point, but cutting social spending and especially pensions to pay for tanks is likely a politically unpopular move that could spark public backlash. But maybe pensions could also be part of the solution. In some countries, such as Sweden and the Netherlands, pension funds already invest in defense companies. But in many other countries, pension funds are avoiding defense investments due to ethical concerns and legal restrictions. In the interest of intergenerational solidarity, it would make sense for pensioners to pitch in. Older generations benefited from the so-called peace dividend, lower taxes because of low defense spending. Kicking the can down the road with debt means burdening the younger generation. But solidarity is a buzzword and means nothing to Europe's elected leaders who care more about the ballot box, where pensioners are king. Across Europe, the battle over immigration has moved from the ballot box to the courts. While more and more European governments are looking to crack down on immigration with stricter deportation and asylum policies, courts across Europe are blocking these decisions. Italy is the most recent example. In 2023, it signed a deal with Albania to process migrants outside the EU. Asylum seekers from safe countries would be detained while their claims were processed. If their claims were rejected, they would then be deported. But Italian courts ruled against it. It decided that migrants' home countries like Egypt, Bangladesh, and Tunisia weren't safe. As a result, these centers, which can hold up to 36,000 migrants, remain empty, despite a price tag of €1 billion. The Italian government accused courts of blocking its policies and responded with a decree listing safe countries. The courts then referred the case to the European Court of Justice, questioning whether national laws can define safe countries. Their ruling is expected in May or June. The European Court has already ruled that a country cannot be deemed safe if even a part of its territory doesn't protect all citizens. This sets a high bar that most nations fail to meet. But Italy isn't alone. In 2022, the UK signed a migration deal with Rwanda. Legal challenges cancelled the first deportation flights. In 2023, the UK Supreme Court ruled the plan unlawful. It called Rwanda unsafe and said refugees would be at risk of being returned to their home countries. The new Labour government cancelled the deal in July last year, with the deal having cost the UK €850 million without deporting a single person. France has similar problems. In early 2024, the Constitutional Council struck down part of its new immigration law. It included stricter family reunification rules and rules differentiating between citizens and migrants for social benefits. The court claimed that these measures were unconstitutional and violated human rights. In response, the French government said it would propose a new immigration bill in early 2025, which it has still yet to do. Faced with these legal setbacks, governments are exploring new ways to work around the courts. The UK overruled its courts by declaring Rwanda a safe country, and Italy did the same with its decree for safe countries. In France, some right-wing politicians have suggested changing the constitution to make stricter migration policies possible. And finally, some governments are working within the EU on migration deals and policies. The EU has already signed migration deals with countries like Egypt and Tunisia to help limit illegal immigration. It's also looking to strengthen deportation rules for rejected asylum seekers and to create return hubs outside of the EU, much like Italy's Albania plan. But the upcoming ruling of the European Court of Justice on safe countries could derail these plans. It would limit the scope of what migration policies European governments can actually enforce. And it seems that the ball is now in the court. European manufacturers are under pressure, with the United States pushing for tariffs and Buy American and Chinese goods flooding its markets. To support its industry, the EU is now moving towards a Buy European policy. There are two main reasons behind the EU's move: the US and China. Both have distanced themselves from free trade rules and support their industries with hundreds of billions of euros. The US massively subsidizes strategic sectors, leaving European companies behind. And Trump's tariffs would make European goods more expensive, giving an advantage to American goods. Meanwhile, China is dumping goods, or selling subsidized products below the cost to dominate the market. The European industry has been almost entirely wiped out. Another reason is that the EU wants to reduce its dependence on foreign imports, especially in strategic sectors as defense, green technologies, and microchips. So now the European Commission is taking action. It's not a full Buy European plan. Instead, the EU is focused on protecting key industries. Last week, the European Commission presented its Clean Industrial Deal. A key measure is a made-in-EU quota for government purchases of green technologies. Or in other words, it's like saying buy 40% European. The Commission said it will adopt such European preferences criteria for all strategic sectors in 2026. Until now, such purchases have been based mainly on costs, like in Belgium, where the government bought electrical buses from China last year because they were 20% cheaper than all other options. Just a few months later, the European Union introduced a tariff on BYD vehicles as they were considered unfairly subsidized. What are the benefits and downsides of such a Buy European policy? Well, first, it would protect European jobs. Without protection, European factories could close as they can't keep up with unfair competition. Buying more European goods would reduce dependence on China and the US. And finally, it would defend fair competition. If other countries protect their own industries, Europe can't compete with outdated free trade rules. But there are three possible downsides. First are higher prices for consumers, and China or the US might retaliate. However, considering the US and China already have a Buy American and Buy Chinese Act, it's unclear on what grounds they would do so, not that it would stop them. Public authorities in the EU spend around 14% of GDP every year on goods and services, or around 2 trillion euros. So non-EU companies would feel the effect of Buy European quotas. And finally, it's difficult to implement. A Buy European policy could clash with the EU's internal market rules and could instead lead to a Buy German, Buy French, or Buy Spanish approach. European countries would need to treat companies from other EU countries as the same as their national companies. So the EU is not adopting a full Buy European policy like Buy American, but it is shifting towards protecting key industries and balancing free trade with economic security. France and Algeria are in the midst of a visa war over the return of unwanted Algerian citizens. France gave preferential treatment to Algerians in a 1968 migration agreement. Looking for workers for its economy, the agreement gave Algerians preferred conditions for family unification and sped up the process to get long-term residence. Some of Algiers' best and brightest have moved to France, including many of the country's doctors. But Algerian immigrants in general pose many integration challenges to France. They have higher unemployment, are more likely to claim social benefits, and are highly overrepresented in criminality. And the Algerian government has been slow to accept the return of citizens, especially criminals that France wants to deport. Only about 42% of deportees were actually taken back. France has previously tried to restrict the visas it was giving to Algeria in order to force the country to take back its citizens, with little success. And relations between Algeria and France, its former colonial power, have worsened, mainly over the memory of the Algerian War of Independence. Despite efforts at reconciliation by Emmanuel Macron on the war, international affairs have made the spat worse. France recently broke with Algeria over the fate of Western Sahara, a disputed territory where Algeria supports an independence movement, but which neighboring Morocco claims as its own territory. France recognized Moroccan sovereignty, which angered Algeria. Relations took another turn for the worse these past couple weeks after Algeria arrested Boualem Sansal, a French Algerian intellectual seen as a political opponent to the Algerian government. And French courts recently condemned Algerian influencers for inciting terrorism in France. After a terrorist attack in Mulhouse by an Algerian man that killed one elderly Portuguese man and wounded 5 police officers, France's interior minister declared that he wanted to cancel the 1968 migration agreement. The French government had reportedly tried to send the men back to Algeria 14 times. While cancelling the deal has been a talking point from the French right for a while, which views it as a bad preferential deal with an increasingly unfriendly country, now there seems to be growing political will to do so. But France is isolated and has received little support from the EU. While other EU countries also have trouble sending back immigrants to Algeria, they have other priorities. Italy and Spain have deals with the Algerian government for natural gas and development projects. And cancelling the deal does not even have the backing of French President Emmanuel Macron, who has the last word on French foreign policy. Macron says he wants to renegotiate the deal but not cancel it, and advisors close to him cited his fears that the nearly 2 million strong Algerian diaspora would break the house. It seems that France is held hostage by the Algerian diaspora and the criminals that Algeria doesn't want to take back. In the brief, Austria's government took office on Monday. Christian Democrat Christian Stocker will lead a coalition together with the Social Democrats and Liberals. The far-right FPÖ came out on top of the elections but failed to reach an agreement with the Christian Democrats. Germany has resumed taking in Afghans seeking protection. 2 days after the election, 155 Afghans arrived by plane. In 2023, the German government had suspended immigration from Afghanistan due to risk of abuse. Over 36,000 Afghans have entered Germany through a special program since the Taliban takeover. China's plan to build Europe's biggest embassy in London faces opposition. Activists and politicians fear that China will try to tap by nearby internet cables and data centers. While the local council opposed the plan, the power to approve or reject the deal has been taken over by the government, and UK's Labour government is eager to expand trade relations with China. In London, the Assembly has rejected an investigation on grooming gangs that sexually exploit young girls. Mayor Sadiq Khan has refused to answer questions about whether grooming gangs are operating in London. Underage girls have been sexually exploited throughout the UK for many years, mainly by men of Pakistani origin. The EU is looking to secure a free trade agreement with India this year. Negotiations have been ongoing since 2007, but market access for products such as cars as well as intellectual property protection remains an issue. Both sides now want to strengthen ties to counter Trump's tariffs and China's trade practices. Germany is planning to massively increase defense and infrastructure spending. The coalition to be announced a proposal to exclude defense spending above 1% of GDP from the country's debt brake rules. Additionally, a special €500 billion fund should finance infrastructure projects over the next decade. The proposal still needs to be approved by a 2/3 majority of parliament. That was it for this week. If you like this video, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. Also, I plan on starting a mailing list soon to share these episodes, so if you'd like to sign up for them, then click on the link down below.